Today is Thursday, January 27th, 2022, and the time is 9:02 a.m. The AB 3121 Task Force meeting is now called to order. Good morning, my name is Camila Moore, and I am the chair of the task force. Before we begin, let us have the staff do a roll call for attendance to establish whether we have a quorum. Parliamentarian Johnson?
Yes, thank you. Chair Camila Moore,
Present.
Vice Chair Brown,
Present.
Member Bradford, Member Grills,
Present.
Member Holder,
Here.
Member Jones Sawyer, Member Lewis,
Present.
Member Tamaki,
Here.
Member Montgomery Stepp.
Here.
Madam Chair, there are 7 individuals present. A quorum is 5, and a quorum has been established.
Thank you, Parliamentarian Johnson. Thank you, members of the task force and members of the public. Happy New Year. We are excited for this upcoming year. And as it relates to our efforts with this historic task force, I would like to remind the public that the public chat function is open. And while the public chat function is open, this is a friendly reminder to keep the engagement respectful. So from the review of the agenda, you can see that it is a full agenda. So to ensure that we complete it during the time allocated, we will need to make sure that we follow the timeline established. And of course, to keep us on time, we have Parliamentarian Dorothea Johnson. And so now, without further ado, we will go to public comment, which will last an hour. And again, people who are providing public comment have 3 minutes to speak. So now I will turn to Ms. Aisha Martin-Walton, who will coordinate the public comment. Thank you very much.
Good morning, Chair Moore, task force members and members of the public. My name is Aisha Martin-Walton, and I am with the Department of Justice, and the task force would like to hear your public comments. The public comment period will be for 1 hour, and each person will have 3 minutes. Please be advised that in fairness to everyone, at the 3-minute mark, you may be politely interrupted and your microphone turned off. However, please know that there is a public comment period during each meeting and that the task force encourages everyone to participate. You may also submit written comments to the task force members at any time via email at reparations.taskforce@doj.ca.gov. To participate in public comment this morning, please use the raised hand function. Some of you may have already done this. Locate the button on the upper right-hand side of the screen. On the sidebar, you will see the shape of a hand. Click on the hand to prompt the feature. On our end, we will accept your hand. Then you will see a notification at the top of your screen to continue. You will have to click continue. You will then be elevated into the meeting as a presenter and automatically muted until it is your turn to speak. Please note that there's a 20-second delay between the attendee and the presenter mode, so please keep that in mind as you're being promoted.
Try tapping above to edit. Sorry, I'm still not sure about that.
Sorry, excuse me. At the conclusion of your comment or at the 3-minute mark, you will be muted again and return back to the level of attendee. We will accept the raise hand function feature as they come in, and once the person in front of you is done speaking, Trini Hurtado, also with DOJ, will say your name to prompt you, indicating that you may begin. So Trini, can we have our first speaker, please?
Yes, our first speaker is Angela Nirvana. Angela, you've been unmuted. You may now begin.
After George Floyd was executed, corporations vowed to do better with respect to diversity, including tech. Instead of paying reparations directly deposited to freedmen, they poured billions of dollars into orgs like the BLM Global Federation, which raised $90 million the year of George Floyd's execution alone. Critics say the BLM have increasingly moved away from being a Black radical organizing hub and have become a mainstream philanthropic and political org run without democratic input from its earliest grassroots supporters. That's the grift. Corporate and government weaponizing our ongoing Holocaust to give everyone but freedmen the reparations we are long overdue. At the recent Freedmen's Bank Forum, Harris and Yellen spoke about our ongoing Holocaust. Then Mr. Luis Pastor spoke on his North Carolina credit union whose assets increased from $700 to $800 million thanks to the government's $9 billion set aside. Now he'll issue mortgages to his people to take over the South, where our ancestors' blood and bones are buried from heinous U.S. chattel slavery. He accomplished this in 21 years. We've been here since before the country was formed, and I don't know of any freedmen bank that boasts $800 million in assets, nor any freedman that can afford a mortgage here in California. They can barely afford rent. Ms. Boulder spoke on Boyle Heights and how the people were at risk of losing their homes to foreclosure. The population of Blacks in Boyle Heights is less than 1%, white 67.45%. So in essence, he's speaking of yet another white wealth transfer at the Freedmen's Bank Forum, all of this money being exchanged in our name while we're constantly being told there's no money for freedmen reparations. As for the tech industry, whites and Asians dominate Silicon Valley as we bear witness to freedmen being gentrified out of San Francisco because the median home price is $1.3 million, the median rent $4,200. And if our median income is $40,000, even the 2% Black folks in Silicon Valley aren't even freedmen. It's African immigrants who descend from slave trader whose median income is double that of freedmen in the country our ancestors built with their lives. Ergo, the problem with flat Blackness. This data needs to be disaggregated akin to the Asians to unmask the failures of this government toward freedmen. And this is why our ongoing Holocaust should exclusively benefit freedmen in the form of reparations over multi-generations. We've been legislated to the bottom as the anchor of America's capitalism, and it makes my stomach turn to bear witness to these ethno-genocidal plans for freedmen at every branch of government. Thank you for allowing me to share.
Thank you, Ms. Nirvana, for your comments this morning. Trini, our next speaker, please.
Yes, the next speaker is Friday Jones. You have been unmuted. You may now speak.
Good morning, Task Force. I'm glad to be here with you again. I am Friday Jones. My name is Kansa Jones Muhammad. I am a city commissioner for the Los Angeles Task Force as appointed by Mayor Garcetti, although my comments today are my own. I'm also the co-facilitator for the national organization NAASD, as well as the Los Angeles chapter, which is a member of CJEC. And we are all very much looking forward to the community engagement plan that we have ready for this year. I just wanted to point out two things. I sent you all a very lengthy email with which transcribed Dean Erwin Chemerinsky, I always say his name wrong, Chemerinsky's interview with Politics in Black with me and Chad Brown. And I really want you all to take a minute to dive into that email testimony because what he explained in terms of Proposition 209 and with regards to lineage being basically the cure for the legal hurdles with regards to the California Constitution and the federal Constitution is very important as you guys continue to discuss the beneficiary class and what that looks like, that you drill down into the level of specificity that's required. And although I understand that there are what I would consider like tiers in terms of time, and when you get into the prison complex, which was sort of a 60s to now thing, there may be a need to widen what the beneficiary class might look like But I think it's very important that you make those tiers very well defined so that at no point in the future, the freedmen and the descendants of chattel slavery wind up having their beneficiary status diminished under the law, because everything is just sort of put together. So those are the considerations I want you all to have. I thank you so much for your work and your time. Have a great session today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Friday Jones, for your comments today. All right, Trini, our next speaker, please.
Our next speaker is Kaya L. Jones. You've been unmuted. You now have 3 minutes.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Task Force. I am Kia Jones, and I am simply a citizen of California, have been for over 50 years. And I want to talk about what I see in terms of business and business ownership for freedmen in California. And as I look around and I see freedmen without business, and my heart breaks because it's clear that we've been excluded and marginalized from business ownership that will employ our own, being marginalized as business owners, being marginalized from obtaining small business loans. Had we not been excluded or marginalized by these institutions and pushed to be perpetual laborers and not owners, we would have financial resources to care for our own, hence the severe homelessness of freedmen in the state of California. I remember seeing charter buses of immigrant investors traveling through the Crenshaw district, taking a good look at us as though they were being shown their economic base and profit centers. This was in the 1990s. Let's fast forward. 85% of the businesses are owned by other groups that resemble the charter buses I saw. There are but a few Black-owned businesses employing Black citizens in our community. Why? This is a result of policies and cultures set forth by the state of California over the course of 50 years and many anti-Black governments. In addition to being excluded or intentionally sabotaged in business, our community has dealt with eminent domain separation from land ownership like Bruce's Beach, freeway construction, new transportation construction along the Crenshaw corridor, where few existing businesses are being threatened by big corporate investors. It seems as though the freedmen community is seen and used as the economic profit centers for every other group. Not only have we dealt with the lack of business ownership, but CIA-driven crack cocaine, mass incarceration that has broken families, thus our children being raised with minimal income, parenting, and protection. With 40 to 50 years of such policies against us, we are in need and deserving of repair. With proper resources, without interference and sabotage, we will establish our own communities and care for ourselves. We have done it before. We will do it again. We demand justice. We demand being made financially whole. After all, it is through our 100+ years of hard work and tax dollars, California is the great state it is today. Thank you, and I yield.
Well, Ms. Jones, thank you so much for your comments this morning. Trini, our next speaker, please.
Our next speaker is Ernest. Ernest, you've been unmuted. You now have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Task Force members. My name is Ernest Russell, and I'm calling on behalf of the Freedmen Agenda League of Michigan. My comments for today are to touch upon public health and discrimination in technology. I think as it relates to public health, America and its politicians at large has failed since the inception of slavery to assist the descendants of slaves or freedmen in the building of public health efforts for our communities that actually work. What we have seen from the government, though, is direct sabotage. And, that's via the de facto and the jury laws that you guys discussed in prior sessions. Ultimately, the effects of poverty, mass incarceration, the war on drugs, America's foster system, and many other systems are the result of a negligent government. And that intentionally looked the other way whenever Black progress was brought to the forefront of American politics. I urge the task force that as we are venturing with bringing, Black American prosperity to the forefront, that we do not allow any outside parties to steer us or derail us from the focus at hand. As it relates to discrimination in technology, a new study from the Dutch Bank shows that Black Americans are experiencing what they call a racial tech gap, which could threaten their future ability to gain meaningful employment and grow wealth in a digitized economy. This is according to Deutsche Bank's global technology strategist, Abhijit Walia. She indicates that the staggering divide in numbers that we have found when it comes to race, and I say this is when it comes to race, but I'm someone who advocates for delineation and data disaggregation because I believe we can see a true picture of the Black American position. But as it relates to us, she states that the staggering divide in numbers basically puts Black American communities 10 years behind the white community for the last 20 years. She said, combine that with the rapid digitization and automation of the U.S. economy, that gap could eventually mean that the numbers of Black American workers could be disqualified or underprepared for 86% of the jobs in the U.S. by 2045. As we talk about reparations, we need to understand the generational impacts that need to be addressed. And I believe as we venture forward in the future, the year is 2022. We need to look back 100 years ago to 1920 and 1922 and really determine if the position of U.S. freedmen has changed, if any at all, when it comes to socioeconomic progress, in the system at large. I honestly believe that we're still the bottom caste, and I believe that discrimination in technology is a result of improper representation and the deliberate masking of true Black progress in America. With that being said, I would like to, request that the task force considers reviewing data as it is to determine the true positionality of Black Americans who descend from slavery. And I would also request that you guys consider supporting data disaggregation arguments that are being made across the country as a result to getting the true delineation.
I'm so sorry to interrupt you in the middle of your sentence. Thank you so much for your relevant comments today. All right, Trini, our next speaker, please.
The next speaker is Christopher Lodgson. You have been unmuted. You now have 3 minutes. Christopher? Mr. Lodgson?
Can you hear me now? Yes,
yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, continue, please.
Yes, it says I'm unmuted. So I'll start again. Thank you and good morning. Happy New Year. Chris Lodgson with the Coalition for Just and Equitable California, CJEC, giving the official comment for and on behalf of CJEC today. First, thank you for selecting us as an anchor organization. We are really excited about this amazing opportunity. Wanted to thank each and every single one of you. We've had very good first meetings with our anchor partners and our anchor facilitators. Big shout out to you, Dr. Grills, Mr. Michael Stoll, Mary Lee, Andre and Andrea at the communications firms, Amma, our facilitator. Big shout out to our anchor partners too, the Black Equity Collective, Black Power Network, African Black Coalition, COPE, I think that's Congregations Organized for Prophetic Engagement, the Repair Institute, the Othering and Belonging Institute. Hopefully I got all those names correct. Big shout out to everyone and looking forward to our listening sessions coming up as well. We have selected one of our listening sessions for June 19th, 2022. So we are very much looking forward to that. That's Juneteenth. And we are working on selecting our date and location for our other listening sessions. Looking very much forward to this process. It's been really good to start, and we're looking forward to working with the task force and with our anchor partners on some principles and some guidelines for listening sessions and ways to hold ourselves accountable to that, because we are accountable to our community. So wanted to start there. Also, you're going to be talking about community of eligibility today and hopefully throughout the rest of your conversations. Looking forward to this type of conversation and these types of conversations. They've been good so far, and we're looking forward to continuing them. We would like to put in a request though, since our team were a part of the people who actually negotiated that specific line on special consideration. I know you're going to hear from Secretary Weber on this, but we would like to request that we be allowed to also testify and help inform you about the meaning and intent behind that as we helped negotiate that. Also, you're also going to be talking about things you can do now, so-called low-hanging fruit. We have some ideas about low-hanging fruit. We think you can support AB 1604, specifically Section 4 of AB 1604, which finally asks California and requires, rather, California to disaggregate data for Black Americans who descend from U.S. slavery. Right now, there's nowhere in the state you can go and say, hey, give me some information about Black folks who descend from U.S. slavery. There's nowhere in the state that you can do that right now. That bill, that language would change that. You can support that now. You can also support ACA 3 to remove our horrible exception to and for involuntary servitude right now in our state constitution. I had a great opportunity recently to talk to Samuel Brown, one of the original authors of ACA 3. Brother did 24 years in prison, just came home. Let's welcome Samuel home right now. He wrote the legislation while he was in prison. We can support ACA 3 right now. Support for federal reparations also. You can also issue a support letter for federal reparations. And finally, you can also support a budget allocation to and for the Secretary of State's office, specifically to the Director of Archives, for help in supporting getting records and research ready for how people are going to document their eligibility for reparations. We had a great conversation with the Secretary of State a couple weeks back. That's something that she recommended that the task force do, and we agree with that. Finally, if I have a few more seconds.
Chris, I'm so sorry.
Okay,
I'm so sorry to cut you off.
No worries. I got most of it in. Thank you.
Great comments. Thank you. All right, Trini, our next speaker, please.
The next speaker is Lita Torre. You have been unmuted. You now have 3 minutes.
Yes, hello, good morning. I'm glad to be here again with you all. I am hoping to have two things happen. One of the things that we would like to support is a testimony from the International Tribunal, which is the Spirit of Mandela, which happened from judges from across the world that talked about the genocide of our people. I'm hoping that they would be considered as a testimony in the upcoming hearings. I am also hoping that we can nominate the 482-57 Black Box Project, which is basically from us here locally, which is the Richmond Progressive Alliance, the Afro Socialists, which is through the Democratic Socialists of America. If you know, they're almost in every state, mostly Blacks in that Afro Social group, the Western Movement Assembly, which deals with not only unions, but cooperatives and organizers. And we're hoping that this Black Box Project 482-57 deals with the counties and the cities, just like people would say they buy their cookies from Girl Scouts. We're hoping to have a black box, which would really support our communities to tell their testimonies. It's great to have the history, but the people will support this case that we're up against for this state. And so here in Richmond, we are one of those 57 counties, one of those 482 cities. We hope that people will take the initiative to sit out in front of grocery stores, Black bookstores, in the hood, in your neighborhoods, near HUD properties, get a table and have a black box. We as organizers believe that Solutions can support this, and we hope that you would support us to allow everyone else to join in recording, because this is what was needed when Martin Luther King went church to church and people came from any sector, if they were working class, if they were maids, if they were pastors, and if they were assemblymen. They came in as a united front to research and to take action together. So Black Box is what we would like to propose. And we hope that when you come for our Richmond Listening Project, we could talk more about that and support other cities, again, in the 57 counties to have a black box. Again, just asking people what is their issues that they've had, right? Some people have had from our city, the refinery, where they have generations of asthma. We, with the Red, Black, and Green New Deal, we're taking those notes, but we need this information to go to you all as a task force. It may be, again, Marin City, people that were desegregated because of the schools that were Sausalito, mostly white, and then the unfortunate piece with the Martin Luther King School is all Black. and the lawsuit was last year. These stories
Excuse
of
me,
how,
Ms. Torre, I am so sorry that your time is up. I hate to interrupt you
thank
in
you.
your thought. Thank you so much for your comments today. All right, Trini, next speaker, please.
The next speaker is Harvey Allen Brody. You've been unmuted. You now have 3 minutes.
So thank you and good morning. It's an absolute honor for me to have this opportunity to speak to you today. I'm convinced that this committee has the potential to make a difference in a cause that has been near and dear to my heart for as long as I can remember. In my 83 years, I have at times been doubtful that we could get to this date. And even with events being as dark as they are at this day, I believe that it is the moment that we can make reparations a reality. Words themselves will never be enough, but conversations are essential. As I have tried to talk about reparations with colleagues, friends, and family, I too often have been disappointed by their attitudes. Excuse me a sec. By their attitudes and by their interests. Following the lead of our African American brothers and sisters, white folks like me need to dig in and reach far and wide to help each other understand why this is the right thing to do and the right time to do it. Better late than never, and better now than later. One way I chose to participate in this conversation is through music. I wrote a song and created a video that speaks to this issue from my heart. And I hope that this song will resonate in a way that is useful to the cause. Dr. Grills, I'm excited to hear your report on community engagement. I'm sure it will provide a roadmap for building support as the task force moves forward. And members of the task force, I look forward to your continuing leadership and the opportunity to continue to have a conversation in whatever way it is most effective. Thanks again for the opportunity of presenting.
Thank you, Dr. Brody, for your comments today. Trini, our next speaker, please.
Our next speaker is Sharice Cryer. Sharice, you've been unmuted. You now have 3 minutes.
Good morning, task force members and community. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good morning. I'm calling in because I wanted to follow up on an email I sent to the task force at the end of December addressing concerns with one of the expert witnesses, Professor Smith from Oregon State. And in all clarity, I did reach out to Professor Smith as well, but there was an article last month in the San Francisco Chronicle where Professor Smith said reparations might become more palatable if funding was used for measures to combat poverty, support job training, reduce mass incarceration, programs that aid descendants of slavery while crossing racial lines. And this gave me pause because basically what I felt she was saying is reparations are not palatable for descendants of American slavery unless we're including other groups. And I reject that notion personally. A lot of times recently when Black organizations are talking about getting restorative justice for our community, we oftentimes include the Brown community, and I love my Latinx friends and family members, but that sentiment is not often reciprocated when we're talking about getting benefits for people or restorative justice, et cetera. So I would encourage the task force to take a look at some of the testimony and people who are giving expert witness testimony and kind of verify beforehand what their thoughts are for reparations, because this is something that can be used as a weapon or a sword in the future. Also, following up on Bruce's speech, an expert witness, Ms. Ward, provided testimony that she was representing the family of Bruce's Beach. However, in November, the county of LA said they were still seeking the closest living heir. So I would like the task force to please clarify who she was actually representing.
Finally, there has been a discussion on tiers of reparations for Black folks in the state of California, and I personally reject that notion. If we're talking about tiers of reparations on the policy side, yes, but if we were talking about cash reparations, there's no need to dilute our claim. And I would encourage you to look at the lineage-based reparations per Professor Chemerinsky's suggestion. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker will be Ingo. I'm sorry if I messed up your name. You've been unmuted. You have 3 minutes.
Hello?
Yes, continue.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Hello?
Yes, Mr. Ingo, we can hear you.
Okay, I'm assuming you guys can hear me. All right, my name is Ingo, and I've been born and raised in California. I just wanted to talk about the California's part in what I like to call soft genocide, the part in that, with the redlining, the non-hiring of blacks all through California, the insertion of cocaine into our neighborhoods, the so-called war on drugs that was designed to put brothers and sisters in jail. I can just talk about my own personal treatment at one of these universities at California, where I sat in the class with about 3 other blacks, and the teachers and the others acted like we didn't even exist. Then another piece of proof of that is the drop in the California black population. 1970, California's population was 40% white, 38% Hispanic, 17% black, and 3% Asian. Today, it is 40% white, 40% Hispanic, 14% Asian, and only 6% black. If this was an eagle or a bear, we'd be an endangered species. All right. Another short thing I'd like to say is I believe that with the reparations, we should also try to implement some kind of program where we create some kind of economic bubble for ourselves, like a triangle trade with Africa, e.g., like maybe we can be the traders for Ghana with their cocoa, thus making the economic bubble like the Koreans do with, say, like their beauty supply line. And then also tech and business. That's something we need to also really and focus on. I myself am in tech. I'm a programmer, and business is just an essential that we all need anyway. That speaks for itself. I'm not going to go into that, and that's all I wanted to share today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ingo, for your comments this morning. Trini, do we have any other speakers?
Yes, our next speaker is Chad Brown. You have been unmuted. You now have 3 minutes.
Good morning. Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello, members of the task force. It's still January, so I wish you all a happy new year. Good to see you. I hope that you all had a joyous, safe, and healthy holiday season with family. I wanted to call and just quickly reinforce and reiterate comments that were made by Chris Lodgson of CJEC. As you all know, I am also a member of CJEC. I am also a member of NAASD, the Los Angeles chapter. And I want to commend you for putting on today's agenda a discussion about the quote unquote low-hanging fruit, or what this task force can do in the interim as it deliberates to actually affect change and be a leader nationally in this reparations movement. So one of the things Chris mentioned was ACA 3, which is a constitutional amendment that would finally remove the abomination of a slavery loophole that appears in the state's constitution now. We have to understand that if we're going to be reparationists, we must also be abolitionists. And so ending and closing that slavery loophole, I think, is paramount in the duties and the responsibilities that this task force, that this commission has in front of them. So ACA 3, written again by Samuel Brown, introduced by Assemblymember Comlager. That bill could use your support, and I think your support could go a long way there. In addition to that, CJAC has been working on delineation disaggregation language that we introduced initially as AB 105 in the Upward Mobility Act of 2021. That bill has been reintroduced in a new session as AB 1604, AB 1604, the Upward Mobility Act of 2022. Again, it is vitally important that we start disaggregating the data and looking specifically at the conditions of the descendant community so that we can craft solutions that are going to not only be targeted and reach that community, but that we can then measure the outcomes of those solutions. So AB 1604, 1604, again, I feel the task force can lead by lending your support to that piece of legislation. And finally, on the note of federal reparation, what I have been seeing, I've been involved now in reparations advocacy for over 3 years. And what I've been seeing is that there is a real disconnect between the federal effort and what is the grassroots or the activist effort. We have so far seen the federal effort stall and is resting on the laurels of an HR 40 bill, which we have heard from our experts, Dr. William Sandy Darity, John Tachieshi, who led the redress movement, and Dean Erwin Chemerinsky with his comments. And HR 40 is a woefully insufficient and substandard and flawed bill. We need this task force to step out front and lead from California to not only show or send the clarion call to the federal government that reparations are due and the federal government is the culpable party, but also to recognize that the piece of legislation that is currently in the House that is gaining support is flawed and will not lead us to the ultimate goal of reparations. Yes, Aisha, I know I'm over time.
You're good.
I will stop there. Please, everyone, have a great meeting today. I look forward to listening.
Thank you. All right, Trini, next speaker.
We do have a speaker in the waiting area. Mr. Sadler, if you could press the continue button so that you can participate. Okay. Okay, it's just a few minutes until they get over. They just clicked on their buttons again. The next speaker is Robert Reed. Mr. Reed, you've been unmuted. You may now speak. You have 3 minutes.
Hello, can you hear?
Yes, please continue.
Okay, so first of all, let me start by saying hello. Hello to everyone on the panel, and also in the chat, I saw a lot of really good comments, and I kind of just wanted to touch on one where we have an organization who really wants to be a part of all things that is reparations, and I don't necessarily think that they have the best intentions in mind, and that is NCOBRA, led by Cam Howard. They have really some very problematic ideas about what they would like to see reparations look like, and it's very Pan-African in form, and I don't think that that's what the people want. And I would really ask that the commission listen to the people and not these legacy organizations that do not have the best interest of Black people in mind. We had somebody just speak on HR 40 and the problems with the bill. A lot of those problems come from NCOBRA and people who are affiliated with that organization, edits that they made with the bill. And so I would really, really just ask that the commission keep in mind that, if we're doing this for the people, then the people have to speak. And if the people are saying no, keep NCOBRA and all of their affiliates away from anything that is reparations minded, just keep them away and really take that into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert Reed, for your comments this morning. Trini?
Okay, I have one person, Mike Sadler. If you could press there he is. Okay, Mr. Sadler, you have been unmuted. You have 3 minutes to speak.
Hi, yeah, my name's Mike Sadler of the Black Business Company. We work on digital visibility in terms of search engine results for Black people online and Black ally businesses. The one comment, it's my first meeting joining, so really appreciate everything that's going on. The one comment I think that we should highlight is that, especially on this day where we want to highlight discrimination technologies, to make sure that we involve the digital technology best practices into how we sort of conduct these meetings. I think the visibility of the task force is low, and I think that, you know, even doing things like live streaming to YouTube or doing small digital marketing campaigns, I'm not sure what the budget is like, but it really doesn't take much to go a long way. And as somebody who's, you know, done award-winning campaigns for, you know, Sony and Amazon and A24 and what have you, I can tell you that it really doesn't take much to generate awareness on such an important issue. So I'll spend, you know, most of the day as a listener just soaking it all up. But I do want to highlight that, you know, it's very important for us to get the word out there about this. Otherwise, I have concerns that we may be doomed to fail because we may be unable to curry public support. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sadler, for those relevant comments. Trini, do we have any?
He was our last commenter. There is no one else in the queue right now.
Okay, Chair Moore, it's 9:43, so we have about 25 minutes for more commenters, but I'll turn it over to you.
Sure. Thank you both for that. So we'll go to the next action item, which is the approval of the December meeting minutes, with the caveat that, of course, members of the public can continue to call in between now and 10 a.m., and we will receive their calls before we go to the following agenda item, which is our first witness panel of the year. So without further ado, we will go to the action item, approval of December meeting minutes. So there's a bit of feedback, so if folks can just mute their mics for this action item, approval of December meeting minutes. So the December meeting minutes were provided in our meeting materials, and I know we all have had a chance to review them. So I will put a motion on the floor, and I move to approve the December meeting minutes as presented. Is there a second?
I second.
It has been properly moved and seconded to approve the December meeting minutes as presented. Is there any discussion on the matter? Hearing no discussion, I will move to, oh, sorry, Member Grills, I see your hand. You're recognized.
I just had two quick edit comments on page 12, I believe it is. Oh Lord, there's a typo on the page. It's page 6 of the, not the page count in the document, but the page, if you're looking at the counter for the PDF file. And there's a word that's incorrect at the bottom of a paragraph. It says dine, and I'm not sure what the word should be, but it's not dine. And then on page 14, there's a paragraph that talks about the backlog on inspections required for Section 8. And I believe there's a word missing in that sentence. There should be Black people find themselves shelter, and I think it's without shelter. So those are just two quick edit comments.
Thank you for that. Is there any other discussion on the minutes? Okay, so what I'll do now is I'll actually withdraw my motion and I'll do another motion, and I'll move to approve the meeting minutes as amended, recognizing Cheryl Grill's edits to the meeting minutes. Is there a second?
I second. If I can second my own edit.
It has been properly moved and seconded to approve the meeting minutes as amended by Member Grill's comments. Is there any discussion on the matter? Hearing no further discussion, I will now turn to Dorethia, Parliamentarian Johnson, so that a roll call vote will be established for this motion. Parliamentarian Johnson?
Yes, thank you. I will call the roll call for the vote to approve the minutes as amended. Chair Moore?
Aye.
Vice Chair Brown? Member Bradford? Member Grills?
Aye.
Member Holder?
Aye.
Member Jones Sawyer? Member Lewis?
Aye.
Member Tamaki?
Aye.
Member Montgomery Steppe?
Aye.
There are 6 members present and voting.
Amos Brown, aye.
Okay, I'm sorry, Vice Chair Brown, what was your vote again?
Aye.
Thank you. There are 7 members voting. There are 7 ayes, 0 nays, and the ayes, I'm sorry, Madam Chair, did you hear the vote?
You said 7 ayes, 0 nays.
7 ayes, 0 nays.
Yes, thank you, Parliamentarian Johnson. The vote was 7 ayes and 0 nays. The ayes have it, and the minutes are approved as corrected. We will now return back to the first agenda item, which is public comment. I believe there are 2 more speakers in the queue. Again, as a reminder, we have until 10:10 a.m. for this particular section of the agenda. So for members of the public, feel free to call in, and you have 3 minutes to speak, and we will hear you. So I will turn back to Ms. Martin-Walton and Ms. Hurtado.
Okay, our next speaker is Cash Gaines. Mr. Gaines, you've been unmuted. You may now speak. You have 3 minutes.
Check, check. Yeah, peace to the panel and to Don Tamaki, a deep bow. First, I'd like to say, since we're talking about technology, and I'm going to speak a little bit quickly, no disrespect to the panel. I know you guys have by 2023 to suggest reparations proposals. Y'all know I mentioned earlier 40 acres and a Tesla, right? That our land as well as an update to the mule is necessary for us to have true autonomy. Think of it a little bit simplified as 40 acres and an electric vehicle, because we know that the EV tax credit that the government funds pays up to $7,500 for any first-time buyer for an electric vehicle, which is helping to sell vehicles. So I wanted to call in today to mention 2 things: that there's a Black-owned electric vehicle company we can support instead, should people want to support them. That's called MIMS Motors, MIMS Motors USA. Although based in Detroit, I definitely believe there's someone who we should support as far as fulfilling the claim for electric vehicles for Black Americans in California. Again, I have to reiterate, Gavin Newsom said by 2035, gasoline vehicles will be taxed and you can't even sell them in California. So we should have our people living in the future. As well, there's a lady named Katie Porter of Irvine who says that she's trying to get us off of oil companies, oil executives using government land, not even to drill oil. They have 13 million acres of land that they're not drilling oil with. We can use her to reclaim that land and move it to what I'd like to suggest today, Black Americans becoming the solar generation. Black Americans becoming the melanin of America by disproportionately building solar panels on our land instead of drilling oil from them. So this is a country of competition. We should be supporting the Black-owned car company as well as Tesla if necessary. And lastly, I want to say that there was a Black man who worked at the Tesla factory in Fremont, California, who was called the N-word, right, disproportionately, and he had to sue Tesla and won $130 million. I only shout him out to uplift my people, because we should understand that Elon only used $20 million to create the Tesla company that he has today. So while he's at the forefront for technology with the Gigapress and other ways to disproportionately build electric vehicles, we can have a Black-owned electric vehicle company that's too big to fail, supported by the government, if we tie it to this reparations proposal. So thank you to everyone who's listening. Again, it's 40 acres in a Tesla, 40 acres in an EV, and really 40 acres in a MIMS, a Black-owned electric vehicle company. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gaines. Trini, you said we had one more speaker?
Yes, the next speaker is Sherry DC. You've been unmuted. You now have 3 minutes to speak.
Hello, my name is Cherie DC. Thank you for allowing me to speak. I'll try to be very brief. I am a genealogist and a reparationist. I spent the better part of the last year helping freedmen, descendants of American chattel slavery, trace their lineage. And I think that that is a burden that is unfairly placed on our lineage. We should not have to spend money to go out and figure out what our family history is through acts of individuals. Corporations and the government has all disseminated and fractured our family history. And I think that it is incumbent upon this task force to aid in descendants of American chattel slavery in identifying their particular family history, so that that is the first step in actually reclaiming everything that has been taken from us. People look to Bruce Beach as an example. There are many people in our lineage who had family that was taken from, that had land, that was taken through eminent domain and other nefarious means. And I just want to stress how expensive it is for descendants of American chattel slavery to put their history, their family history together. The information is there, and it should not be so hard for people to find it and be able to lay out exactly their connection to chattel slavery. I really want to stress that. People should not be coming out of their pocket with thousands of dollars to just learn a history that is being hidden from us by our own government. Thank you. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Cherie, Ms. Cherie. Do we have anyone else in the queue at this time?
Yes, we do. The next speaker is Kelly Farish. Ms. Farish, you've been unmuted. You may now speak. You have 3 minutes.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Again, my name is Kelly Farish, and I was a part of a class action lawsuit against Chase Bank. We represented all of the Black financial advisors, and we were able to settle with them in 2018. The reason why I am a part of this task force, because the types of practices that these large banks are doing, it's particularly affecting the Black community, and they are purposely using their business power to take away services in our communities, and it's particular to us. In our lawsuit, they have a demographic match where they are purposely not allowing African Americans to have investment advice in any of the branches that are located in low to moderate income areas, and those are areas that are heavily populated with African American people. So a part of this task force has to address the fact that wealth is generated in the community through large banking institutions. And if we are not allowed to participate in receiving loans, receiving investment advice, that further is deteriorating our ability to participate in the larger economic growth in the United States. And that's something that is particular to us. They have admitted through different meetings that we've had with them and through their attorneys that they do demographic matching. So it's really important that we tag these large banking institutions and that they should be responsible for participating in the reparations payout to African Americans specifically. And that was what I wanted to say.
Ms. Farish, thank you so much for your comments this morning. Trini, do we have anyone else at this time?
Yes, let me see if I can get them over quick enough. Hold on.
Okay.
Amaru Young, please press continue. Our next speaker is Amaru Young. You have been unmuted. You have 3 minutes.
Hello, yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, continue, please.
Hello. Hello. Thank you. Thank you, most honorable guest of the task force. Thank you again for having this, for staying steadfast in this and keeping the conversation as it should be on the descendants. I just want to call in and speak on what the brother spoke about earlier about these legacy uh, so-called reparation groups and how they have not been dealing honestly or fairly with the people. You guys have showed what true transparency is through your task force by allowing people to view, set in, and make comments. But unfortunately, when we're looking at the HR 40 bill, we're seeing that a lot of non-transparency is taking place. And like the gentleman said, it's coming out of the NCOBRA and the NARC organizations that are doing this, that are keeping the people blind and not really focusing on what the people has been requesting. And we've been requesting edits and updates to the HR 40 bill. And so I just want to call in to just make sure that point is driven home. I want it on record that the people are not, do not trust NCOBRA, do not trust NARC to do their due diligence in making sure that this reparation fight goes to the actual descendants of the worst crime done to humanity by the United States government. Thank you again for letting me speak, and thank you for your work.
Thank you, Mr. Young. Trini, do we have anyone else?
Yes, our next speaker is Brandon. Brandon, you've been unmuted. You have 3 minutes to speak.
Thank you. Speaking of reparations, I think it's important to take into account the technology.
Mr. Brandon, can you speak up a little louder?
Yes, is this better? What about?
Not very much. How about a louder?
Oh, hold on.
Hello, is that better?
That is much better. Thank you.
No, sorry about that. Sorry about that. I was listening on the Bluetooth, but yes. So I think we have to take into account the technology aspect as far as innovations being made daily with technology and making sure Black American descendants of chattel slavery aren't left out as far as the metaverse is concerned, as far as artificial intelligence and the things that they're doing with that and the progress. So I just hope you all can incorporate that into whatever we're talking about here. And I do want to drive home that lineage matters in this as well. It's not for everyone. It's only for those who have helped build this country and ancestors been here hundreds of years. And I think that's a very important note to take. That's all I have for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Chair Moore, we have, I believe, by my calculations, 9 minutes left for the public comment hour. So that would be 2 more speakers. Trini, do we have anybody else in the queue?
Yes, the next speaker is Daryl Edwards. Mr. Edwards, you've been unmuted. You now have 3 minutes to speak. Daryl Edwards. We can see you, Mr. Edwards. Can you speak, please? We can't hear you. Mr. Edwards?
Trini, maybe we can come back to him. Is that
Okay.
possible?
Yes.
Who do we have next?
One moment. Iris Peoples, please press continue. We're just waiting for Iris Edwards to press continue, please. Iris Peoples, I'm sorry. There we go. Iris Peoples, you've been unmuted. You now have 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you guys so much for being here. Thank you guys so much for all that you do. My name is Iris, as you said, and I have been a Californian for my entire life. I happen to be a descendant, of the Great Migration. My family comes by way of Louisiana and then by way of the Carolinas and then Virginia. I trace my lineage to the 1600s so far, and I'm just really, really thankful to you guys for what you are doing, and especially in terms of technology. I would like you guys to please take into account the education aspect and to please make sure that our children have access to adequate technology for education, but also for going forward to train for the future. One thing that I have found is that in being going through the education system here in California myself, in the Bay Area, I was told that a lot of our lower scores were due to the high Hispanic population and the high immigrant population. And so while I saw a lot of resources being taken away in terms of trade, wood shop, mechanics, home ec, sewing, music, all of those things, I saw resources being allocated at the same time to people who didn't speak English, but I assuming that they really needed it. And then when I saw some data, because I am involved as a parent, I saw that English language children were actually scoring higher on the standardized tests than children who were Black or poor. So I think I do want to make sure to put that on record, that we need to make sure that as we are taking care of our immigrant children, that we are not leaving our natural born or, our children are not being left behind. And that's unfortunately what the record is showing. So thank you guys for everything. And please make sure to consider, the children as well in technology. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Peoples. Let's see, just a time check-in, share more. It's about 10:04, and it looks like we have about 6 more minutes. Trini, do we have anyone else?
There's no one else in the queue, but I'm going to try and give Mr. Edwards another chance. I did try to find out if he had any issues, but I didn't receive a response. So we'll give him a second try and see if he can comment now. Mr. Edwards, can you hear us? Daryl Edwards? Okay, he's not responding, and I did not get a response from chat from him. And there just some Virginia Ladish. Please press continue. Ms. Ladish, you have been unmuted. You now have 3 minutes.
Hello, thank you very much. My name is Virginie Ladish. I'm calling from the International Center for Transitional Justice. I just want to thank you all for the incredible work that you're doing, and just wanted to introduce myself and let you know that we're an international organization with headquarters in New York, but offices around the world. And we've worked with countries and groups to advocate and advance for reparations policies. And I just want to offer our support in your efforts in any way possible that you might need. We'll be very happy to share some ideas that have been successful in other contexts, as well as some pitfalls you might want to avoid, if that could be helpful. So I just wanted to share that, and thank you all for your work.
Thank you, Ms. Ladish, for providing your comments this morning. Chair Moore, it is now 10:07, and I do not believe we have anyone else in the queue. Do we, Trini?
Actually, we have 2 people in the queue.
All right, Chair Moore, your pleasure. It's 10:07.
We can take the last 2.
All right, these will be our last 2 speakers for the morning. Okay, Trini, bring them up.
Please press continue. Kay Easter and Antonio Thomas, please press continue. Antonio Thomas, you have been unmuted. You now have 3 minutes.
Hello.
Yes, please speak.
Good morning.
Hello, my name is. Hey, how you doing? First, I'd like to say thank you for this platform, and I respect everything that y'all are doing. And my name is Antonio Thomas, and I just want to go through and say this: that I see around this nation, inside these in other cities and other states, they doing similar things, but they always saying one particular thing is a study, and I understand what studies are, but I rather say collect the information and act upon what need to be acted upon, because we always remember that slavery was an institution that started in 1619. We always remember that slavery was an institution in 1776 when America gained its independence, where we fought in that war and still was enslaved. We always remember that we didn't get our freedom till 1865, and we fought into this war for independence and was promised 40 acres and a mule and was given a protected class status as freemen. We always remember we went back into slavery once then when they assassinated Lincoln, and then we became into another slave status when they changed our designation, and we went through convict leasing. We went through other terrorism and other things that were set on by KKKs. They burned down our towns and everything else that was subjugated on us, and we still survived and went through. So we always remember that for our people. And I want y'all to always remember that those things was never promised, those things was never given, and those things are deserved. And that is what we are asking for, nothing but the respect, the honor, and that check that's owed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas, for your comments this morning. Trini, I believe we have one more speaker, and this will be our last speaker of this morning.
Yes. Kay Easter, you've been unmuted. You now have 3 minutes to speak.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Hi, thank you so much for this task force and your transparency and everything you guys are doing. I'm excited about this discussion about technology right now, because one of the things that we have learned from the Roy Beck book, Back of the Hiring Line, there were some statistics provided that showed that Black Americans used to hold a significant amount of tech jobs back in the 90s. And so it seems that there was a concerted effort to move us out of that industry by bringing in other people from other countries. So I would love to hear, some more information on that, or, some further discussion in the future into more research in terms of how that, was done and how it harmed us. because there's this idea that we don't want tech jobs and things like that, and it's just not true. Also, our people who are in the tech industry are experiencing a lot of racism and a lot of stressful, disgusting situations that they're placed in the work environment due to this same type of concerted effort to push us out. So again, I thank you guys so much, and I'm looking forward to further discussion on that or more details that are provided in terms of investigating that situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Easter, for your comments this morning. Thank you all. We have reached the allotted time for public comment. If you are not able to provide a comment, we invite you to attend future public meetings or to submit written comments or testimony via email at reparationstaskforce@doj.ca.gov. And I will now turn the meeting back over to Chair Moore. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Martin Walton, and thank you, Ms. Hurtado, for your assistance. So we'll now go to our first panel of the year and of the day. Before we do that, I want to acknowledge Senator Stephen Bradford. Welcome. And so our first witness panel of the day is on discrimination in technology. And we have 4 incredible expert witnesses who will provide expert testimony today. Our first expert witness will be Yashima Milner, who is the co-founder and executive director of Data for Black Lives. Raised in Miami, Florida, Yeshi began organizing against the school-to-prison pipeline at Power Youth Center for Social Change as a high school senior. There, she developed a lifelong commitment to movement building as a vehicle for creating and sustaining large-scale social change. Yeshi returned to Power U in 2013 to lead a victorious campaign to improve breastfeeding policies at the largest public hospital in the country. More recently, she was a campaign manager at Color of Change, where she spearheaded several major national initiatives, including Organize, for the only online petition platform dedicated to building the political voice of Black people, and a successful campaign to remove Bill O'Reilly from television. She has a Bachelor of Arts from Brown University and serves on the board of the Highlander Center in Tennessee. We'll also hear from Vincent Lee. As a legal counsel with the Greenlining Institute's Economic Equity Team, Vincent leads Greenlining's work to close the digital divide, protect consumer privacy, ensure algorithms are fair, and that technology builds economic opportunity for communities of color. In this role, Vincent helps develop and implement policies to increase broadband affordability and digital inclusion, as well as bring transparency and accountability to automated decision systems. Vincent also serves on several regulatory boards, including the California Privacy Protection Agency. We'll also hear from his colleague, Deborah Gorman. Deborah Gorman finds gratitude in developing long-term relationships, dynamic teams, and shared accomplishments. As a middle child of a biracial, military, first-generation immigrant family, Deborah embraces the beauty and the strength that lies in her differences. As Greenlining's president and CEO, Deborah guides the organization's growth and direction and serves as a unifying voice for our multifaceted policy work, bringing her unique intersectional perspective to bear. She partners with the staff and board to develop programs and policy strategies to advance racial and economic justice and to strengthen ties with the Greenlining Coalition. We'll also hear from Dr. Safia Noble. Safia Noble is an Internet Studies scholar and professor of gender studies and African American studies at the University of California, Los Angeles, where she serves as the co-founder and co-director of the UCLA Center for Critical Internet Inquiry. She holds affiliations in the School of Education and Information Studies and is a research associate at the Oxford Internet Institute at the University of Oxford, where she is a commissioner on the Oxford Commission on AI and Good Governance. In 2021, she was recognized as a MacArthur Foundation Fellow, also known as the Genius Award, for her groundbreaking work on algorithmic discrimination. Dr. Noble is a board member of the Cyber Civil Rights Initiative, serving those vulnerable to online harassment. She is the author of a best-selling book on racist and sexist algorithmic bias in commercial search engines entitled Algorithms of Oppression: How Search Engines Reinforce Racism, which has been widely reviewed in scholarly and popular publications. So without further ado, we will go to our first expert witness, which is Ms. Milner. Ms. Milner, you have 15 minutes, and then we'll go to Vincent Lee and Deborah Gorman, and then Dr. Sophia Noble. Welcome, Ms. Milner.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me? Yes? Okay, good. I know that Trini will be uploading my slides. So, thank you. Once again, thank you, Chairwoman Moore, and thank you to Lisa Holder, Don Tamaki, and all members of the task force to study and develop reparation proposals for African Americans. I also want to thank Alicia Turner and Trini Hurtado for their work ensuring that logistically I was set to give expert testimony today. Surely the effort to recognize and repay the debt owed to Black American descendants of slaves demonstrates justice in its truest form. As the introduction said, my name is Yeshima Beth Milner. I'm the founder and executive director of Data for Black Lives. We are a movement of over 20,000 scientists and activists working to make data a tool for social change instead of a weapon of political oppression. I started Data for Black Lives because for far too long, data has been weaponized against Black communities. Because the bullets, police dogs, and fire hoses of the past have become the predictive policing, data-driven voter suppression, and facial recognition of the present. You can go to the next slide, Trini. Thank you. My testimony is foregrounded in our call to action to abolish big data. If you want to learn more about this, you can find my talks online on YouTube or on our website. But briefly today, it is a call to action that recognizes that the big data systems that are becoming implemented and normalized are not novel or innovative or revolutionary at all, but they are a part of a long and pervasive historical legacy and technological timeline of scientific oppression, aggressive public policy, and the most influential political and economic system that has and continues to shape this country's economy, chattel slavery. I believe that what we face today, and we must name, is a data industrial complex, where zip code is destiny, debt becomes a ball and chain weaponized by complex and obscure financial systems that I'll talk about later, where data is a strategy to rob people of political power by manipulating elections, a system where the persistent, archaic, and racist notions of risk persist, narratives that are more powerful and impenetrable than any prison cell or shackles or holds that could ever be built. You can go to the next slide. In my testimony today, I'll be discussing how the notions of risk that actually originated in the slave trade through insurance agencies and other slave finance have come today to foreground the black box algorithms and other data-enabled technologies that unless we fight for sweeping policy change like reparations, we will repeat history and actually usher in some of the most violent and human and civil rights assaults of our lifetime. To bring it personally, the very first time I even heard the term at risk was in the 4th grade. Another student, coincidentally in our elementary school's computer lab, told me that she was at risk. Immediately, just hearing the word elicited a sense of fear and worry in me as a 9-year-old. I asked her what she meant. She told me that she was enrolled in an after-school program for at-risk students, for kids who are at risk of going to prison, of having unwanted pregnancy or joining a gang. Of course, she liked the after-school program, but it was as if the lack of funding at our under-resourced, predominantly Black, and immigrant school offered limited options for extracurricular activities, as well as very narrow options for what and who we could become. And this became a self-fulfilling prophecy. While I myself and others survived the school to prison pipeline, many of my peers did not, as they not only had to fight to overcome the material circumstances of their lives, but also the narratives and stereotypes that continue to criminalize them. You can go to the next slide. Thank you so much. So this is an example of one of my favorite forms of machine learning. used to power autocorrect and synonyms in most text editing software. In this, we see the connotations of risk: danger, jeopardy, hazard, gamble, probability, menace. Again, how did this term used primarily in business, originating in the slave trade, insurance, loss prevention, and in finance, become a label operationalized through policy and weaponized against young people, children, and young people like myself and my friend? With the end of the civil rights movement, the war on drugs, or the war on communities as we call it, and with the introduction of massive legislation in support of mass incarceration, came a wave of research and data to justify the targeted and coordinated effort to warehouse entire communities into prisons. You can go to the next slide, thank you. Super predator was introduced by social scientist and Bush administration advisor John DiIulio in 1995. DiIulio created a whole theory around the notion that a new generation of street criminals is upon us, the youngest, biggest, and baddest generation anyone has ever seen and known. Based on all that we have witnessed, researched, and heard from people who are close to the action, he wrote, here is what we believe. America is now home to thickening ranks of juvenile super predators, radically impulsive, brutally remorseless youngsters who rape, murder, assault, rob, burglarize, deal drugs, and create serious communal disorders. You can go to the next slide, thank you. Of course, none of this was true. The data, in fact, showed that crime was decreasing across the board at this time. And John DiIulio would go on to refute his research and his racist claims and become Catholic, as you all can see in this article here. But of course, by this time, the cat was out the bag. And of course, John DiIulio was not alone. You can go to the next slide. In the 1980s, well before Super Predator, Dr. Ira Chasnoff built an entire career off of the crack baby myth, which was based on a flimsy study consisting of only 23 participants. Of course, his hypothesis was lockstep with the most racist political intentions, a fear that one day a generation of children will grow up to be crack addicted and a burden to civil society. All of this was wrong, and the study should have been refuted based on the sample size alone. But it was not, and the myth persisted, even though, again, the reality was opposite. One of the babies from the study grew up to be a healthy, functional, and quite exceptional young woman, the first in her family to graduate from college. It was found that poverty, rather than crack addiction, which then was a proxy for Blackness, was found to be more harmful in a child's life. You can go to the next slide, thank you. Similarly, the welfare queen myth was used and continues to be used to dismantle our country's safety net, fight against cash payment for reparations, privatize social services, and siphon money away from the very communities who need them and who pay for them with taxpayer dollars. Meanwhile, the real welfare queens are the ones who benefit, are the corporations who benefit more from government subsidies than all individual welfare recipients combined. You can go to the next slide, thank you. So before we can talk about what an algorithm is, we have to talk about what goes into it. Of course, input data and output, scores, recommendations, but above that, history and values. To define an algorithm, by definition, it is a set of step-by-step instructions to solve a problem. A recipe is an algorithm, a list of instructions or a process to make the dish, the ingredients that make up the dish, and the result based on what we define from the beginning of the recipe as a success. Whether we want to make something that's healthy or something that tastes good, regardless of health benefits. The decisions are determined by a question: what are we optimizing? Computational algorithms are layered, complicated. Their ingredients are not just raw data that is fed into them, and the result is not as simple as the outputs that come out of them. Scores, ratios, GPS routes, or even Netflix recommendations. But again, as this chart demonstrates, history and values are what influence inputs and outputs, and most importantly, the very models that are trained and developed, the algorithms themselves. One example are FICO credit scores. Contrary to popular belief, FICO is not a federal agency, but the Fair and Isaac Company, a for-profit entity started by William Fair and Earl Isaac a mathematician and engineer who 25 years ago sought to disrupt the risk and lending industry through the use of machine learning. The inputs to the FICO algorithm, as we are told, are the amount of debt we have, the percentage of missed payments, etc. And this information, our data, are provided through the collusion of data brokers. We know them as Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion, and then fed into the FICO algorithm, and out of the algorithm comes our score. And while we are told that certain behaviors and financial characteristics comprise our credit score, we aren't able to verify because FICO is a proprietary algorithm. It's a black box, devoid of transparency, and with the purpose of displacing accountability away from the for-profit companies that profit from our data at our expense. And also, FICO scores reflect the ways in which algorithms hold tremendous power over our lives, even though we have no recourse. Right at this very moment, there are students that will have to drop out of school because they cannot qualify for subsidized student loans. There are people who are struggling to afford rising public transportation costs because they can't afford subprime car payments, and even hardworking families facing homelessness because they cannot qualify to rent an apartment, all because of a 3-digit number. And these 3-digit numbers will increasingly decide whether we should get hired for the job, and maybe even someday, even whether we'll be able to vote. And while it is in violation of federal law to deny people housing, employment, and education based on race, you can't sue an algorithm. And private companies like FICO, who I must also mention, it is in their best interest to ensure that some people have low scores and others don't, argue that their algorithms don't discriminate. They say nowhere in that algorithm or in their input is race a variable. And there's so much research that also indicates the ways in which, even when you control in different neighborhoods, such as there was a study done in Illinois for income and for education and the amount of death, Black folks in some zip codes had much lower scores than white folks in other zip codes, even when controlling for those other factors. Because we know that based on the history of our country, you can go to the next slide, thank you so much, Trini, how our neighborhoods and our municipalities are organized, you don't even need to use race as a variable. When redlining and segregation, the legacy of slavery, have made zip codes proxies for race. And this is a history that I think everyone on the call knows. But only 7 generations after slavery, 6 million African Americans left the South for the industrial centers of the North, Midwest, and West Coast of this country in a historical moment known as the Great Black Migration. As Black people contributed tremendously to the growth of the manufacturing industry and to the culture and politics of metropolitan life, our federal government responded through policies that sought to institutionalize racist sentiments and permanently entrench Black communities in a case-like status. Policies that were foregrounded in the most essential part of economic mobility in the US, home ownership. You can go to the next slide, thank you again. In 1933, as part of the New Deal, the Homeowners Loan Corporation developed a grading system that deemed some areas desirable while others hazardous. These areas were largely minority areas, many Black, and today 74% of the areas deemed hazardous, quote unquote, according to this grading system, in 1933 remain today low income, under-resourced, and neglected. It did not matter that federal law ruled racial zoning unconstitutional, real estate boards, neighborhood associations, and white mob violence made it impossible for Black people to own homes, and were deeply invested into turning these communities into sacrifice zones. And this is a map of Oakland, for an example I'm going to use now, but it's amazing how zip codes created in the 20th century to organize the country around for the Postal Service have become digital artifacts of this history, encoding this history, and therefore extending the shelf life on the racist public policies of the past. You can go to the next slide. I saw how notions of risk, how the impact of zip codes, and how even these maps became again present as a young organizer in Oakland, California. I was a youth organizer at an organization in the summer of 2009 at the height of the foreclosure crisis. Part of my job was to do data collection for a survey led by Just Cause Oakland, my internship site, along with the Alameda County Health Department, to document and expose the effect of foreclosures and evictions on the health of residents. This is a chart that from the report that we developed. In 1980, 47% of Oakland was Black. Today, according to the 2020 census, Black people make up less than 24% of Oakland's population, although the population of the city itself has been growing for years. How did it happen that since 2010, with over 50 new white and Hispanic Oakland residents have moved into Oakland and have been able to take advantage of opportunities of being in a booming metropolitan hub, while the Black families that built the city and laid roots were forced to leave the city in droves? And one way that I witnessed firsthand was through the targeting of Black communities through the complex financial schemes that resulted in the foreclosure crisis of 2010. In addition to my role doing data collection that summer, my job was to also organize residents in West Oakland to stand with their neighbors against the banks. And I love that somebody brought up the banks. I think Ms. Kelly Farish, I wrote your name down. In the event of a foreclosure eviction, which were happening daily, every day, I met with residents who had fallen victim to predatory lenders, who with the promise of more affordable mortgages or a second mortgage to help cover medical bills or pay for renovations and repairs, were aggressively targeted for subprime predatory lending. Next slide. People like Miss Elizabeth, whose family had left the sharecropping conditions of the South to come to California, a state that held the promise of opportunity that was not possible in the South and much harder to achieve in the cold and racist North. Miss Elizabeth's husband found work in the West Oakland Navy Yard like so many other Black men born only a generation away from slavery. The Victorian house that they bought and where she and her husband raised their children and even their grandchildren was seized in only 9 months after a nice representative, quote unquote, from the bank visited her daily, promising that with a second mortgage, which they said she qualified for, she'd be able to pay back medical bills that piled up since her husband's death and even leave some cash for her children to do necessary renovations. She was told that all these payments would be well under the amount she received monthly from Social Security and pensions. But they did not tell her that she was given an adjustable rate mortgage and that her mortgage would balloon in months to far from what she could afford, making payments too expensive and causing her to default on her payments and lose her home. As you can see in the map, the rate of defaults, as well as where we see that the hazardous mapping definitely overlays. It shows a trend and it shows the extent of the targeting as well. And they definitely did not tell Miss Elizabeth that her mortgage was being repackaged with other mortgages and pooled together in these complex and obscure financial schemes, securitize and then re-securitize as credit default swaps, and that there was a lot of money being made by banks and hedge funds betting on her inability to be able to pay for this adjustable rate mortgage. When Black families all across California and all over the US shuttled their belongings into storage units, closed the doors in their mother's or father's home for the last time, or like Miss Angela, another leader I work with, became sick from legal battles with Wachovia Bank because her home was defaulted due to robo-signed documents. They literally had an automated system that signed people's documents to push forward default and foreclosure. While all this happened, bank executives and hedge fund managers walked away with a slap on the wrist, millions in bonuses, and have even been since awarded with positions in the former and present presidential administration. In fact, if the federal government is ever in need of an example, how to redistribute cash payments, and in a large amount, they should look no further than 2009. Big banks that were deemed too big to fail were given the biggest bailout and the biggest example of reparations I think we'd ever seen under the Dodd-Frank Act, to the tune of trillions. In fact, we are still calculating exactly how much money banks received, while people like Miss Angela, Miss Elizabeth, and all the people that I worked with that summer in Oakland lost their homes permanently. The foreclosure crisis was a man-made crisis against Black families, Black homeownership, and Black stability. You can go to the next slide. Thank you, Trini. And today, there are many other examples of how notions of risk are being perpetuated through black box algorithms and weaponized against Black communities. I know my co-panelists will likely provide more context on others, but if we look at this theme of risk more, we see this evident in risk assessment questionnaires, where instead of jury and instead of judges, people are being sentenced to time based on questions like, were you suspended? Or does a hungry person have a right to steal? Knowing that with a question like suspension, in many counties and states, Black students are 8 or 9 times more likely to be suspended than their white peers, not because they're bad kids, but because of racist entrenched practices and policies in schools. In the area of car insurance, we see here that this is a mapping of Chicago. On the left here is the Homeowner Loan Corporation map, and on the right is a map in the dark pink where people have to pay the highest premiums. Literally, people in Black neighborhoods are paying more on insurance premiums, even though there's less crime than folks who live in wealthier, whiter, more downtown areas. Next slide, please. And it's even getting into health. This is an article from an investigation that I think is still going on with United Health and their algorithm that literally used cost of care, or how much people are able to spend on care, to determine health risk and therefore care needs. Of course, this algorithm, which was used on hundreds of millions of patients, neglected and denied care to Black patients who are more at risk. Because again, we live in a country where who has the health insurance to be able to pay out more for care? Not Black folks, white folks, and other folks. And this is another example of the way in which, an interesting way, in this case, Black people were more at risk, but it was used to deny them care. You can go to the next slide, thank you. But we also, to kind of conclude and wrap up, remember, as folks in our network always say, Black Americans arrived here on balance sheets, and they themselves, us, we were collected as collateral for debt owed. And so none of these practices are surprising, but they should inspire urgency. You can go to the next slide. This is one example that I like to show in my presentations and research of a balance sheet used by a slave plantation in British Guyana, where actually my family were enslaved and where we're fighting for reparations there. And literally there was a line for each day and columns for many types of categories of enslaved men, women, and children. They include in the field, watchmen, house servants, carpenters, children's invalids, runaways. The daily process of dehumanization was deeply numerical. Right below these abstracts were identical reports for livestock. The Negro account and livestock account use the same methods of taking an inventory, calculating increase and decrease, purchase, sale, birth, with little difference made for man, woman, child, oxen, goat, and cattle. And of course, it's not lost on me that the name of this plantation was also called Hope and Experiment. One person mentioned that JP Morgan Chase, and it's true, JP Morgan Chase, currently the biggest bank in the US, admitted that its subsidiaries accepted enslaved people as collateral for loans. So we're talking about loans, we're talking about payment, we're talking about default. If plantation owners defaulted on loan payment, the bank took ownership of enslaved Africans. And JP Morgan was not alone. The other predecessors their predecessors made up Citibank, Bank of America, Wells Fargo's, and a whole list of other financial firms. You can go to the next slide. And finally, to conclude, I want to wrap it up so I have time for other folks to speak. The story of Black Americans, slavery, and algorithmic discrimination, again, what we are fighting against is not new, but you can really literally pull a thread through all of these events in history over the last 400 to 500 years. And as the late civil rights scholar Lani Guinier wrote, Black folks in America, when it comes to algorithmic discrimination, are like miners in a canary, miners' canaries. Miners often carry the canary into the mine alongside them. The canary's more fragile respiratory system would cause it to collapse from noxious gases long before humans were affected, thus alarming miners to danger. The canary's distress signaled that it was time to get out of the mine because the air was becoming too poisonous to breathe. As she writes, those who are racially marginalized are like the miners' canaries. Their distress is the first sign of danger that threatens us all. It is easy to think of that when we sacrifice this canary, the only harm is to other communities of color. Yet others ignore problems that converge around racial minorities at their own peril, for these problems are synonymous warning that we are all at risk. At Data for Black Lives, we fully support cash payments and sweeping policy changes in support of a reparations agenda. And we believe that this has to be done not only to repair the harm done and what has been taken and lost, but we must do it in order to secure the civil and human rights for Black Americans and literally everyone else in the age of big data. To abolish big data means to dismantle the structures that concentrate the power in the hands of a few and to put it in the hands of those who need it the most. At Data for Black Lives, our mission is to reclaim data as power, as protest, and as collective action. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Milner, for that incredibly moving and thought-provoking testimony, and especially with your last comments. Rest in peace, Harvard professor Alani Guinier. Now, without further ado, we will turn to Vincent Lee and Deborah Gorman.
Deborah, do you want to go first?
No, go ahead, Vincent.
Okay. Trini, could you pull up the slides? All right. Well, good afternoon. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for allowing us to speak on discrimination in technology for the Reparations Task Force. I am Vincent Lay, legal counsel for the Greenlining Institute, and I am joined by Deborah Gorman, our president and CEO. Next slide. So at the Greenlining Institute, we focus on creating a nation where communities of color thrive and race is not a barrier to economic opportunity. Slide. And a key goal in that work is to close the massive racial wealth gap where white families have more than 10 times the wealth of Black families, a gap that is only growing. Next slide. And much of this gap is due to the practice of redlining and the legacy of slavery. And for redlining, as we mentioned earlier, it's where government, banks, realtors, insurers all work together to draw literal red lines around communities of color, preventing Black families from building wealth for generations due to lack of access to investment, loans, home ownership, essentially the building blocks of economic opportunity, all on the basis of race. So my work today focuses on the modern forms of redlining and discrimination in technology. In particular, I focus on the digital divide and discrimination in algorithms and automated decision system. Next slide. And so the main point I want to make today is that redlining lives on in the data that determines which neighborhoods get good access to the internet or new services and technologies. Only the difference today is that it's not done on the basis of race and redlining maps, but on the basis of zip codes, as mentioned earlier, income levels, educational attainment, infrastructure quality, all data points heavily influenced by the legacy of redlining and racial discrimination. And this is why the reparations work is so important. I'll explain with a quick example. So in 2016, Bloomberg did some research and found that Amazon deployed its Prime same-day service in Atlanta in a way where virtually all the white residents had access to the service compared to less than half the Black residents. And this was the case in other cities where predominantly Black neighborhoods were excluded, while their surrounding areas had service. You can see that in Roxbury in Boston and the south side of Chicago. And these decisions weren't made on the basis of race, but they were made on the basis of zip codes and wealth. Communities that had more Amazon subscribers were more profitable, got more investments and services, while poorer, Blacker, and formerly redline neighborhoods were ignored. And this may make sense from a short-sighted business perspective, but by that same logic, it makes business sense to continue to discriminate and redline Black neighborhoods, further limiting economic opportunity and creating a vicious cycle. And that's where we're at today. And this is why the reparations work is so important. It gives us a chance to change the data points that give rise to data-driven discrimination, so we can break that cycle of disinvestment, build wealth, and close the racial wealth gap. The next slide. And we can see another example of this data-driven redlining if we look at access to the internet. A USC study found that in LA, lower income and blacker neighborhoods had the least broadband investment. When we mapped out the internet access and affordability in Oakland, we found that our maps look just the same as those redlining maps in the 1930s that you saw earlier. Similar studies across the country led to the same result. And from our previous example, we already know the root cause of this. Income inequality in the racial wealth gap means less investment. Less investment means fewer choices, higher prices, leading to lower adoption of critical tools like the internet and widening the racial wealth gap. Next slide. You can see this in the data, which shows that Black families are almost 10% less likely to have the internet than white ones, even after making significant gains during the pandemic. And this gap limits economic opportunity for Black families in many ways. Next slide. The first one is that limited digital access means lower digital skill scores. If you don't have the internet, you don't have a computer at home, then you're not going to build the skills that you need for quality, high-paying jobs. Next slide. And we can see that because, you know, the future of work requires more and more digital skills, and getting a good job requires that as well. Next slide. And folks mentioned earlier about internet access and academic scores. Well, the digital divide really also impacts the ability of our communities to find academic success. Black teens are almost twice as likely to report that they can't finish their homework due to lack of internet or a computer. And lower internet access also means worse scores on math, science, and reading tests. Through all of these, you can see that lack of access to technology means lack of access to economic opportunity. Next slide. And the key issue is affordability. And this is something that we can address by building wealth for Black families through reparations. We also need additional policy changes. Next slide. I'm going to skip over most of these. We've made big progress in the past year in investing in broadband in California. We have a new affordability program to help folks pay for internet access. But we should do this year is focus our budget on making sure the communities that need these services actually know about them and can access them. And if we do this right, we can finally close that digital divide and ensure that internet access is not that barrier to economic opportunity. Next slide. So now I'm going to shift gears. We just talked about how data points about wealth can limit access to convenient services like Amazon Prime, as well as essential technologies like the internet. But a similar kind of data-driven discrimination can happen in many other ways through the use of algorithms and automated decisions. Slide. So as mentioned earlier, an algorithm is just a set of rules to follow. And what we at Greenlining are concerned about are automated decision systems that look at large data sets to find statistical patterns to make decisions, right? And we're worried that without proper oversight, these systems can embed the very real history of discrimination and redlining that are reflected in the statistics and the data into their decisions, creating algorithmic bias. Next slide. And this is a key issue for Greenlining because algorithmic systems can determine who succeeds and who doesn't. And in the next few slides, I'm going to go over some examples of this in different sectors and how this discrimination and bias impacts economic opportunity. Next slide. So my first example, as you heard earlier, is from the housing and credit sector. So last year, the markup was able to do a study thanks to newly released federal mortgage data. And they found out that housing algorithms that determine who can get a loan to buy a home discriminated against communities of color such that in some areas, a white loan applicant was 2.5 times more likely to get a loan than a Black applicant, even though they had similar credit characteristics and income. Next slide. What's more, these lending disparities persist even when you just look at credit scores and when you look at places with more consumer protections like California. So a couple takeaways from this study is that race is not a factor in these algorithmic decisions, and yet we have disparate impact and discrimination based on race. Another is that the regulator in charge doesn't know why these discrepancies happen. So that points to the need for a more technically capable oversight and regulatory bodies. And another is that the disclosure of this data was key to find these inequities, and that we need to make this happen more, and we need race-aware data so that we can test these systems that control access to economic opportunity for bias and discrimination. And the final takeaway from me from this study is that the housing discrimination and the redlining of the past is still quite well and alive today, and our anti-discrimination laws have not kept pace with these technologies. Next slide. And there's other ways that housing discrimination can manifest, right? We now have digital tools that make it easier than ever to target and exclude people on the basis of race. In 2017, ProPublica found out that users on Facebook can exclude people from seeing job ads or housing on the basis of race. And there was lawsuits and HUD investigations afterwards. And these powerful targeting tools can be used to further discrimination or can be used in a predatory way that impacts our most disadvantaged communities. Next slide. So even back in 2014, a Senate investigation showed that advertisers were creating customer lists that could be used to target predatory products like high-interest payday loans to financially vulnerable populations. These types of tools, without the appropriate protections, can work against closing that racial wealth gap and keep families in poverty. And on the other hand, in the right hands, these tools can target resources and aid those that need. Next slide. Thank you. So shifting from housing to employment, we found that employment algorithms can learn the same biases as humans, right? An algorithm trained on Amazon's hiring data learned to discriminate against women, perhaps reflecting a culture where men are more likely to be hired and promoted in tech jobs. And we know that Black people are underrepresented in tech, but we need more transparency to make sure that hiring employment algorithms aren't discriminating on the basis of protected classes like race and gender. Next slide. Another example that was talked about in the previous presentation showed, a medical algorithm that determined who had access to better care would preference white patients over sicker Black ones. And that was because white patients spent more money than Black ones. And the hospital assumed that more money spent meant you were sicker. While the root cause of that is the systemic inequality and discrimination that has led to Black families having lower abilities to afford and access medical care. Next slide. So I have two more examples. So beyond medical care, more and more government systems are turning to AI to determine who gets access to social programs like unemployment, child services, medical care. But many of these systems aren't properly vetted or tested before deployment, resulting in improper denials that impact communities of color the hardest. For example, in Michigan, an automated unemployment system wrongly accused tens of thousands of people of fraud, forcing them to make repayments that led families to declare bankruptcy. So one even committed suicide. The exact causes of the errors are not clear, but we need to make sure we catch these issues before we deploy the system in ways that impact communities of color. So that's why Greenlining sponsored AB 13 last year that would require government agencies to do risk assessments to make sure that this kind of discrimination and this kind of errors don't happen. Next slide. So for my final example, it concerns pricing algorithms and in particular insurance. A study from 2020 found that insurers like Allstate were using sophisticated pricing algorithms to create sucker lists, families that were that they could charge more, sometimes increasing rates by thousands of dollars more than pay on their driving risk. This impacts seniors and low-income families the most, and families that are already disadvantaged and reliant on social services to make ends meet. That extra $100, extra $1,000 can make a really big difference, especially when you need insurance to drive. We don't have the racial breakdowns of these data, of these algorithms, and that is something that we need to make sure that when regulators are looking at pricing algorithms for key services like insurance, they aren't discriminating improperly, particularly on the basis of race. And these pricing algorithms aren't used in insurance, right? So Princeton Review was charging Asian communities more for SAT services. Uber was charging more in Chicago to travel to non-white areas. These practices are common, however, normal, and the impact will always be felt hardest by families that are already redlined and disadvantaged. So that's why reparations is so key, so that we can fight these types of data-driven discrimination. However, that alone is not enough. Next slide. There's some policies that we need. We need to make sure that people know where the government is using automated decision systems that impact them. We need to make sure we test for disparate impact to make sure that these algorithms aren't discriminating. And we need disclosures of the data so that we can do that. And one thing Greenlining advocates for is race-aware data. You don't need to use someone's race to make a decision, but we should be able to test on the back end whether your decision is discriminating on the basis of race. And that also needs more technically competent regulators. We need to do audits of these systems, and then we can update our civil rights laws and create regulatory red lines on which practices stop. And then finally, we can promote algorithmic greenlining. Next slide. So I want to end by noting that I'm a big supporter of the potential of new technologies to improve outcomes, right? We just need to make sure they're used properly. And we can see this potential using the CalEnviroscreen algorithm in California. It uses equity indicators like poverty, unemployment, exposure to pollution, and they use that to identify disadvantaged communities that are eligible for increased investment from our greenhouse gas reduction fund. With the help of this algorithm, over $4.5 billion in state funding has gone towards investments in disadvantaged communities, with a big share of that going towards low-income Black and Latino communities, build things like affordable housing, urban greening, clean energy infrastructure, and more. And this algorithm provides potentially a template where we can undo this past discrimination, this past redlining, and use it to drive more investments into the communities that need it most to improve economic opportunities. Thank you. And Debbie, I'll hand it off to you.
Thank you, Vincent. And I don't have a slide, so we don't need to have this slide presented. Good morning, everyone. Again, my name is Debbie Gorman. I'm the president and CEO of Greenlining. I'd like to really start by thanking Dr. Shirley Weber and the 9-member task force for your work and commitment to taking action to study, to develop the reparation proposals for Black families, with special consideration for the descendants of the enslaved, and a real advocate of the Gold Chains project at UCLA and how that's integrated with the work that you all are doing. And again, Greenlining is very appreciative of the task force, that you also have a recommendation of ways to educate the California public about the task force finding. Our work at Greenlining, we also find that there is a tremendous amount of misinformation and disinformation about Black families and the Black racial wealth gap. So that part of your task is well regarded, and we hope to support you in any way we can. A little bit about Greenlining. We've been doing this work for about 3 decades now. We were founded in 1993, so next year we will be celebrating 30 years of doing work that is the praxis of economic and economic equity along with racial equity, which really centers a lot of Black families and the impacts that we have felt over the decades. We have been learning from our missteps, and we've been reiterating and iterating our approaches with a deep dive into our communities of practice. So we try to be proximate as much as we can, and we listen to the community to tell us what it is that we can do to change policies and to remove discrimination and redlining. As Vincent Lay has presented, this pillar of our work on technology and tech equity actually has that thread through all of those things that represent wealth and closing the wealth gap. He started with housing, went to unemployment, talked about health, jobs, and pricing. And this is tough and ongoing, tedious work. And we found that the tech equity or disequity for the Black community is represented in governance, in access to power, in allocating and redistributing resources to communities. And those are all going to be key to how, this reparation and the ability to put proposals forward is successful or not. And Greenlining, just to give a perspective on how we look at closing the wealth gap, we use wealth as defined by the U.S. Federal Reserve and as measured right, by federal agencies to be the differences between the assets and the liabilities. And so the asset side of which, we usually think is home ownership, because there are really 4 real basic ways that we all sort of generate our wealth and how we spend our income, right? So you're going to have your home mortgage or rent, you're going to buy food, you're going to have transportation, and you're going to pay energy for your energy, water, utilities, all of that. And lastly, healthcare. So of those 4 things, there's only one way that you can actually invest in yourself, and that's in home ownership or how you pay your rent. Otherwise, which is grounded in land. Otherwise, that land ownership, you're paying your rent to somebody else. So if we're looking at sort of the assets and liabilities, then the difference is being your wealth. That gap for Black wealth versus